Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. But before I do that, here is a quote just for this episode. Questions are taken for granted rather than given a starring role in the human drama. Yet all my teaching and consulting experience has taught me that what builds a relationship, what solves problems, what moves things forward is asking the right questions. Edgar Schein. Our guest today is a steward of this quote, in my view, is someone that takes the time to figure out what are the questions that need to be asked when it comes to solving the problems of community, leadership, stewarding the mentees to become the future mentors. For over 2 decades, to my knowledge, they've been a teacher, a principal, a founder, and a reinvigorator of schools and education. I've had the pleasure of getting to know them over the last, it feels like longer than a year, but maybe it's not even that. But a friend to the Culture Matters movement, a currently the executive director of North 10th, which is a unbelievable um, idea and staple in a community in, if I understand correctly, Huntington and East Tioga, in which we'll unpack the logistics. So bear
Yep.
with me here in North Philadelphia, and a steward of the theory of action. And man, I feel like I'm not doing justice. Really has spent their life serving children and young adults and those that need not just a handout, but a hand up. Josh Klaris is here today. Thank you so much for
Pleasure.
coming on the Culture Matters podcast. I'm a bit nervous.
It seems that way. I thought I was the one who should be nervous, but it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm excited for this conversation. And it's a great quote. It's near and dear to my heart.
What about that resonates with you? That idea?
So I can tell you that I spent almost 20 years as an educator, both a teacher and a school leader, assistant principal, and principal, mostly in the New York City public school system. And one of the best lessons that I learned about impactful teaching and instruction is to ask good questions. A teacher who asks questions that they know the answer to all the time is not inspiring creative thinking or higher level thinking. And it's actually it's a real problem in our schools that our teachers ask too many questions that they know the answers to, and do not look for a variety of responses from our kids who are really thoughtful, creative, innovative thinkers. And so that was always a valuable lesson to
Hmm.
me as an educator, and looking for that in my schools. And at the same time, I was inspired as a parent as I have twins who are now 20, but they will tell you that our parting message every day, on their way off to school, was ask good questions, because it is the same as a learner, for kids who are going to school. The real power of learning comes from asking good questions, showing curiosity, and digging deeper. And it's not just knowing the answers, but it's actually thinking of the questions. So I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about that and trying to live it out.
What can it do to a child? Um, what can it do to a child to not ask them those open questions, if I understand correctly, or to have
Yeah,
that
yeah.
precondition of like having that answer? What can it do over time?
Yeah, not the direction I thought this conversation would start, but it's a real problem, right? So, it's a compliance-oriented mindset, right? It's always being tested. If a child is sitting there and a teacher is asking a question, we'll use the simple answer, what's 2 + 2? And the kid is there and they either know the answer or they don't. So it's a test question. It's not a question of curiosity. It's not a question of getting to know the child. It's not a question of helping the child understand something. It's a test question, pure and simple, and either you have the answer that's right or you don't, and you're wrong. And so to put that in broader terms, you're either smart or you're stupid, and those are the lessons that we learn in school all too quickly and all too often. And so teachers who ask questions that they do not know the answers to, they may have opinions on, but they don't necessarily have to have the answer, is important part of instruction. And it's not that test questions don't have their time and place and aren't necessary on occasion and, in the right context, but we ask way too many of them. And so we basically train our kids to think that there's a right answer, to only think in compliant oriented type of ways. And as they grow up, they do not have those skills of curiosity, of question asking, of kind of finding out and understanding and working out their own ideas and opinions on things.
Does that at some level separate the person from the subject matter?
I've never thought about that way, but yeah, I think that's correct, right? So little Josh doesn't have a chance of bringing himself into the classroom. And in many ways, particularly for young kids of color who are in our classrooms that have a difficult time seeing themselves belonging in our educational institutions writ large, it just adds to that dynamic.
Mm. What was the early inspiration for the work? Because I remember you originally had founded, was it in East Harlem,
Yeah,
a
New York
charter
City and East Harlem Charter
school?
School.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a huge undertaking.
It was. It was extraordinary and wonderful, and it continues to be an amazing school under some amazing leadership. And it was in many ways a dream come true and a kind of culmination of many years of thinking about what's needed in schools. And I think that so Dream Charter School in East Harlem is a place where I think kids are very much seen for who they are, and given, they have very high expectations for them, and a school that was really created with the child in mind as a centerpiece, right, to the thinking. And the other part of it, which is very much connected to my work now at North 10 Philadelphia, is that a school and the learning that happens in the school is one part, an extraordinarily important part, but only one part of really what feeds a child's upbringing. There is an entire community that is involved in it, and there's a large life of a child outside of school, and so the relations that are built between the child, the school, and the community, out of school time programming, summer programming, social services, all those other kind of wraparound support services was very much at the core of the school that we built, of the organization, the nonprofit that I was a part of at that time, and then it continues. I mean it's an amazing place, and that is very much part of the inspiration of the work that I do now at North 10 Philadelphia.
In the absence of the support outside of the school, can that create more downward pressure from the institution of the school to the child, the children?
So yeah, I would push back, Jay, a little bit on the absence of support. I mean, I think that one thing that we do know that kids get lots of support in lots of different ways. It's not, I'm not saying it's in any way perfect. There are lots of issues, but I think that historically, many schools have just tried to build a wall between what happens inside the school and what happens outside the school. And there are times and cases and situations where that's necessary, but for the most part, how we kind of work together, finding strengths and opportunities in the relationship between school and community, is when it's been really the most successful, and centering for each child. So the conversation, started with question asking and how that's important, how that allows a child to be seen in a school. And if the school refuses to see or recognize the community that has raised this child, that has brought this child to the school, the family that is involved in that child's life, that's a mistake in my book, because those communities have an extraordinary amount of strength, of history, of pride, of resources, that should absolutely be taken advantage of by the school. And the school has its very important role in the education of each child, but it's a partnership in my view. And that's something that I've always brought to my work, to Dream Charter School when I was there, and absolutely here at North 10 Philadelphia.
What makes a great principal?
Oh, that's so I would say that the first thing that comes to mind is that a great principal needs to know great instruction, right? A principal's primary role is to ensure that there's high quality instruction happening within each and every classroom in their building. They don't need to know everything to this conversation, but they need to know how to ask good questions of their teachers so that great instruction is inspired in those rooms, and or the resources that need to come to bear to help teachers know their content and know their pedagogy is the, in my view, the primary role of the principal. Kids need to learn how to read critically, to think mathematically, to analyze the world, ask good questions, so that they can succeed in college or career, in whatever capacity they're inspired to do so. And that's the principal's responsibility. It is very difficult to do that in the current system that our principals work in. The school systems, both district public and charter, particularly in our public school systems, make that role and make that responsibility of principals extraordinarily difficult. And there's lots of reasons for that, but I would say that, but part of the second answer to the question of what makes a great principal are principals who build trust in their school, in their schools, and in their school communities, so that there is a healthy working relationship, teacher to teacher, teacher to and parent to teacher, and administration to teacher and parent. So that kind of culture of trust, which builds a culture of what I like to refer to as of coherence, of like, we're all in this together. We all have a same and shared goal. And there's a collective, there's almost a building of a collective efficacy, that we can all do this together, that it takes all of us to make a great school. And so that building of trust and the principal's ability to build a collective sense of efficacy is would be the second part of that, the answer to what makes a great principal.
How? What are some ways to
Yeah.
master class today?
Master class today. I'm going to go back to your quote. Asking good questions is a huge way, a great way to build trust. Authentic, true, curious question asking, with a real ability to listen to answers. You know, talking to a parent, asking questions about their child so that you understand their child from their perspective. How a principal can do that in his or her own office, as well as asking the teachers to think about really how to find out and understand the children that are in their classroom. So, and I would say that for a principal to also not assume that they have the answers of their teachers. You could have been a great teacher in your classroom. That does not mean you're a great teacher in all classrooms and all situations in your school. So asking true, honest, open questions of your teachers, so that they feel that they can really answer openly and honestly about what they are bringing to the table, where they are struggling, where they need help, but what they can offer, are all really important ways for principals. And the great principals that I've known are really great at knowing what they know and what they can give and provide for their staff, but also knowing the strength of the teachers and the families that are in the school, and how those kind of come to bear. So, you know, again, I think that that's a great way of building trust, right? And that goes along with other kind of like technical skills, you know, like, you know, being a real good active listener, and all those other ways that people know are important to show that you're listening. But building trust is a huge part of it.
What was it about the mission of North 10 that drew you?
Yeah. So at North 10, we talk about our work as creating the conditions to improve life outcomes of the residents of Hunting Park in East Tioga here in North Philadelphia. And, you know, the trajectory of this conversation, I think, you know, it won't be a surprise that, I was drawn to this particular work at a time in which the only service and program that was provided to the neighborhood by the organization was an out-of-school time program here at the Ledenfest Center, which is a community center on North 10th Street, which is where our origin story and our name comes from. And so there was a centering of the needs of children at the ethos and of the organization when I was connected to it. And so kind of there was put simply, I would say that there was an adage that it takes a village to raise a child, is really kind of the most common and simple way of putting it, that this was an organization that, and then a founder, Chase Lenfest, who was really coming to terms with a belief of that adage. And so Chase had gotten inspired by a couple national movements around neighborhood revitalization that at their core took this mantra, it takes a village to raise a child, really to heart, and started to think deeply about what that looks like. And so there's the Promise Zone up in New York City, in Harlem, and those that has kind of inspired Promise neighborhoods around the country. And there's also an organization that has a network of what they refer to as community quarterbacks around the country, and that's an organization called Purpose-Built Communities. And both of them really kind of center communities and neighborhoods in urban centers, and think about the holistic needs of the environment in which children are raised in, that provide the opportunities, aka create the conditions for improved life outcomes. And so very broadly, we think holistically about providing housing, dignified, affordable, safe housing, access to high quality wellness services in the neighborhood, which also includes not just access to health and health care providers, but safe, green and clean environments and public spaces and parks, things like that in terms of wellness. Opportunities for economic development and vitality. And so, there are many things to solve in our world. Intergenerational poverty is high on the list of what's impacted our urban centers. And so putting economic vitality at the, as a core pillar is really important. And then obviously access to high quality educational opportunities from birth through to college is fundamental to the belief. And so those were all kind of like, those ideas were percolating in the idea of Chase and the board here at North 10. And they were eager and looking for someone who could kind of make that a reality. And so taking Chase's vision and the vision of these other organizations and making it tangible and building the actual organization is what brought me to it about 7 years ago.
What's intergenerational poverty for the listeners that have never even heard such a term?
Such a phrase. But I think that what we know is and I'm not one to sit here and spew data and facts, but there is a narrative in our country about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, and then if you work hard enough, you make it. And what statistically has been proven out is that actually it's not true for the majority of our children who are born into poverty, and that poverty just gets passed down from generation to generation. If you're born in particular neighborhoods and particular zip codes in our country, the chances of becoming economically stable, coming out of poverty, and joining the middle class at a very basic level does not happen. And so the idea that it is intergenerational, that poverty is in itself passed on, has very much been systemically rooted and happening in many cities. It is absolutely a rural America problem. I particularly focus on neighborhoods and individuals living in urban populations, and obviously here in Philadelphia now in North Philly. But yeah, that's the
What are
premise.
some of the things these young children, young adults face that are listener has no personal exposure,
Yeah.
it wouldn't even, maybe they would very easily buy into the idea of everyone has an opportunity
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
without having a second thought about it, kind of
Yep.
look
Yep.
at two sides of the conversation.
Yeah, so that's fair. So I will do my best for a quick kind of background on what are referred to as social determinants of health. And social determinants of health are those factors in the place that we live. Either you're born, you grow up, you live, you work, you age, right? So those factors that are in your home place that impact your health, your life outcomes, for lack of a better expression. And so if those social determinants of health are not in place, then your life outcomes are impacted. And those social determinants are everything from your access to, quality healthcare, the built environment in which you live, your access to high quality educational opportunities, and the economic stability in which you live. And so if you live in a home that is full of the stresses that poverty provide, that has real, tangible impacts on your life, from the quality of food that can be on your table to eat, to the stressors that surround you and living in an environment of stress and tension, to
Mm.
the access to seeing different parts of the world. All of that are barriers to a healthy adulthood and aging process. And so those determinants of health, what we really understand, are kind of like what's the phrase? The predeterminants of your health. What it's called, Jay, when you go to like it's the preventative measures so that you don't go to the doctor, right? So
Got it.
if you have money in your pocket, if you have healthy food that you're access to and high quality health fare, you don't go to the doctor as much. You don't get as sick as much. You don't struggle in life as much. And so it is, if you put it in the exercise kind of quintessential exercise, health way, if you do these things, if you eat well, if you exercise, if you take care of yourself, if you get a good night's rest, if you lower your stress levels and meditate and all those things, then you'll be healthier, right? And
Mm.
we know those things in that context. But the social determinants of health really apply it to the environment in which we live, and recognize that that environment actually can either support and help or be a barrier to life outcomes.
Let me see if I wrap my head around
Yep.
this exciting issue.
Yep.
Rather than culture just fixating on, let's say, punishment after, let's say, punishment after, let's stop punishing those that are not guilty. Is that make maybe that, like, I'll give you a scenario. We
Yeah.
want to lower gang incorporation, and we want to lower um, prison rate.
Yep.
Well, then let's not. So now what? If I go to prison, I'm being punished. Maybe something I did. Let's just say I did it. But why did the person do it?
Correct.
Well, maybe because they were punished when they were innocent, meaning in a sense, like just because they're born in a certain apartment with a certain amount of stress and environment and lack of food, that's going to increase the likelihood that they might get attracted to the gang, which then leads to the action, which
Mhm.
then leads to the incarceration where you get punished. It's like, of course, I got punished because I was being punished by the culture in a sense before. I'm trying to link
I
the
think that's
chains
fair. I mean,
together.
I think that increases the likelihood that it happens, was a phrase that you just used and is exactly right. Right? Like, no one wants to, you can't overly justify when someone breaks the law or does something wrong, right? And you can understand the factors that led to that moment. And I think that that's to your point where culture matters in this conversation, right? It increases the likelihood, right? Just because you're born here in Hunting Park, East Tioga, does not mean you have to eat unhealthy, that you are going to, fail in school, and that you will be attracted to, negative influences in life. It's not a absolute one way or the higher likelihood that it happens, absolutely, right? There are all these social determinants that are coming to play that we now understand kind of make it more likely. And I have to say that is, there is always the individual who is ultimately in charge of him or herself in the choices and how we determine what we are going to do. No one is taking that sense of personal responsibility or family responsibility out of the equation. Again, back to the earlier parts of our conversation, it's why, in my view, the most successful schools, are those partnerships, very strong families, high senses of responsibility, morality, ethics, work ethic to, moral ethics. And those need to be understood and respected and brought to fruition in support of schools, rather than thinking that there's some kind of battle between you don't do it our way, and so we both don't see each other's value, and so we don't work in concert with each other. So yeah, the increased
When the
like
family and the school aren't getting along, how does that impact the child?
child is caught in the middle. How does it impact the child if there's a divorced parents and the kid is in and the parents don't get along? What happens to the child when they're sitting at their table and their uncle and their father don't get along and there's an argument, or we know what impacts our kids, right? It's very obvious, and kids are extraordinarily self-aware of the environment in which they live. They may not be able to articulate it, but trust me, they can feel it and they know it intuitively. And that is all, part of the stressors in life, right? If we are growing up in an environment, whether or not it's our home and our, place that we sleep at night, or whether or not it's the place we go to school, and we know that there is a tension between the things that we know are important in our life, school and parents, if they don't get along, it tears you apart.
Wow. What do you say to the listener that has never been a part of the nonprofit world, that has a perception that it's a bunch of hogwash?
People think that. Um,
Yes, my friend. Absolutely.
I guess they're not my friends. Maybe they are. I don't know. You know, I, I'm gonna take it from a more of a my personality, which may be looking at it a little differently. I would say that there are a lot of people who don't understand what happens in a nonprofit, and for the most part, do not recognize the expertise that exists in the nonprofit sector. Um, and and I would include the world of our educators and schools within that, right? And the phrase that I will add myself to that, and many of my educator friends will say, is that just because you have gone to school does not make you an expert in education. You have your own personal experience as being a student in school. That does not necessarily give you the right to tell me how to do my job. I've gone to shop at the Gap, and I don't know what it is to run a retail company. And that's very hard, because the conversations that we're having are great schools do know what it is to engage their customer and to know the value of parents and their kids, bring in their value and use that. But it doesn't mean that the teachers shouldn't be the experts in the room. That's why the most important job of a principal is to make sure high quality instruction is happening in their room. So nonprofit leaders, the ones that I work with, are experts in their field. They deeply know, what it means to run a workforce development program in a high poverty neighborhood in North Philadelphia. Do they have some kind of silver bullet that's going to solve the, issues of intergenerational poverty and systemic racism that have impacted people in North Philadelphia for decades and decades? There's no silver bullet. but are these the experts in the field and should be given respect for that because of the deep knowledge that they bring to it, both lived and learned? Absolutely. And I do think that there's a general non-understanding of the work of an expertise within the nonprofit world. And I would add to that, Jay, that there is an extraordinary pressure in the nonprofit world of being a very savvy business person. Nonprofits are businesses. And, we have to, hit our bottom lines, both for revenue generation and fundraising, as well as keeping to budget and payroll. It is very stressful and very difficult to balance the needs of all the constituents and stakeholders that are involved, from those that you're serving to your staff and team, who have our staff and team in any organization that is a complicated working environment, and the added difficulty of fundraising and revenue generation for nonprofits. So all that is important. We can, there are obviously like the broader things of nonprofits and government and services and this world of capitalism that we live in, that has created the environment that requires and needs nonprofits to do a lot of the work that isn't done by other sectors. And I think that's actually a really good thing that nonprofits are doing it. But I do think that there's a misunderstanding of the complexities and expertise in running any nonprofit, be it a regular 501c3 public charity like North10 Philadelphia, or an educational environment, whether it's a district or a charter public school.
In your experience, working in the field, what are some of the reasons people do give? They give time, money, energy. What do you think?
So that's a great question. I was going to answer it, which may be typical Josh way of answering, is like, there's all the research on like, why do people give to nonprofits? All that, of course, is right in the sense that there's ways of understanding both your trust in the leadership of the nonprofit, your connection to the mission of the nonprofit, the relationship you develop with the nonprofit and trust over time. So there's a connection and all those kind of things that really connect people. And so it's a combination of all of those things. That's how I personally give, right? Like, you got a friend who's doing it, or it's my own neighborhood, or I believe in causes for kids. And this is something, so we make those choices in terms of both kind of who's running it or who's there, and the mission that is specifically part of the nonprofit's mission. I think that it is all of those things, and I do honestly believe that those that are the real givers, I would say, are those that have a deeper understanding of kind of like what it means to live in community. And I mean that broadly. Like human beings are all interconnected, and most of us fundamentally get that, right? And so finding the nonprofit that you feel connected to, because you kind of feel it. It's not like I'm just giving to that, but like I'm giving to myself, right? There's that, like, is there true altruism in the world? You can debate that, but the truth is like, I'm getting something out of this when I give, and it's because I'm feeling connected and close to something, and I feel like it's still part of my community. And I'm talking about individual donors here, Jay, right? Like, I think that is just, ultimately, when somebody is truly connected to a nonprofit and becomes, what we talk about is in terms of like, you can start, like, I gave $5, but then ultimately you're giving 5,000 or 50,000 or $5 million to an organization. That comes because the community of which I am now a part of is my community. And I think that ultimately are when nonprofits and individual donors are really, most in sync.
Hmm.
So that's my broader answer to that. But there's lots of ways of giving in our country, right? Like there's not just the individual donors who want to feel connected or inspired by either an individual. So, maybe there's people here listening and they're like, this Josh guy, he sounds great, and this organization is doing great work, and I'm curious, I'm inspired by it, and so I'm going to reach out and I'm going to start. But if that's going to happen for the next 10 years, which is really our goal, and 20 years, and there's really kind of knowing that this is a long-term solution. And so there's a long-term trust and relationship through the ups and downs. That's what happens. But there's corporate giving, there's grants to foundations, and each one of those kind of ways that nonprofits raise money are really important. Much of those are relational driven, but much of those are also connected to shared missions, right? Corporations, there are healthcare corporations and foundations that, that have foundations that give to health needs, and that makes sense, right? And there are corporations, big and small, that donate either locally, right? Like your local restaurant. We have a great relationship with a small business here that provides lunches to our team. That's a huge corporate gift that we get. To larger financial institutions that, were $25,000, diamond sponsors of our gala that we just had earlier in April. And that's because they have part of their mission is to support certain types of work, and they connect it to North 10's mission.
Uh, the what about the down to the individual? What impact have you seen? So I'll ask it this way. Let's say that the building that I was in
Yeah.
disappeared tomorrow.
Mm.
Like Charlie Munger, one of my idols, he says, invert, always invert, turn it around, like look at it backwards. Let's say that building that is gone tomorrow. What impact would that have on the children and the young adults and the people
Community.
that and the community?
Well,
What would happen? What do you think would happen?
yeah. Um, on a very practical level, and this will be my way of explaining to folks and everybody exactly what happens inside our community center, which is it's the Lenfest Center here on North 10th Street. And it's a 50,000 square foot community center that provides out of school time programming to youth, kindergarten to 12th grade, as well as adult workforce development training. For, our goal is to serve about 250 people a year, connecting them to jobs and build job readiness and life skills so that they can keep those jobs. And it's a place of gathering that provides just overall services to folks and a place for them to connect to each other. And one thing that they connect to here is that there's a market in-house that serves over 1,000 households in the neighborhood. And so on a very practical level, if this community center was to disappear, 85 kids would not have a safe place to go to after school every single day and throughout the summer. And they would not get the support services to help them be ready for post-secondary life, college and career readiness skills that we build with them. There will, be 200 some odd people who will not have access to job training, life skills training, and pipelines to careers or post-secondary educational opportunities that come through our programming here. And this quick plug, we provide our adult workforce development is we call it our impact center here. We work very closely with two extraordinary other nonprofits here in Philadelphia, Uplift Solutions, which provides basic job readiness and life skills trainings and connects people to jobs like for commercial driver's license certification and jobs and HVAC training jobs. And they work particularly well with returning citizens and justice impacted individuals. And then we also work with an organization called Graduate Philly that provides opportunities and access to post-secondary educational environments, 2 and 4 year college, as well as other kind of post high school training. So very practical. Those go away, as does our market. And those 1,000 households in the neighborhood don't get supplemental food that they need because of the food insecurity. This neighborhood is a food desert and does not have easy access to any high quality or really any quality supermarket or food. So those are the kind of things that on a very practical level, you take this away and that and those conditions that support improved life outcomes disappear. I
Mm.
would also like to think, and this has been a huge effort of North 10 and our work here at the Lenfest Center over these past years, is that what also will be lost is a hub of community engagement. People need places where they can connect with other people, and those are very hard to find, particularly in urban neighborhoods that have been under-resourced for decades. You don't have your local coffee shops, to make it, plain and simple. You don't, have your local park where you can kind of sit freely with your kid playing and you're catching up with your neighbor on what's going on as you watch your kids play in the playground. And so the Lenfest Center, for many, has come to be a place where they can connect with their neighbors. And that, I think, would be an important loss
Mm.
if it would to just disappear.
What the percentage of like how safe is it in that area?
By statistics, it is, if not the least safe, the top two least safe zip codes in the city of Philadelphia. I don't have the crime rates on the top of my head, unfortunately, Jay, but it is, we do know that over the last 5 years, almost every single block in our catchment area has been impacted one way or another by violent crime. We just had a terrible story that one of our neighbors was assaulted on her own block, just coming home just the other day and is hospitalized. And it is very prevalent and at the forefront of everybody's mind every day. And everybody, in terms of the
Gosh.
residents, as well as the people who work for North 10, it is very much front and center. And it's not just those kind of like, violent and physical crimes. There's a lot of street activity from the, fairly serious, robust drug activity that happens in North Philadelphia. Kensington obviously is the worst and a tragedy in every single way. But drug use and opioid use and street use of it is prevalent in this neighborhood and impacts us consistently.
I asked that because I'm curious if those all those children and young adults, in the absence of that medium of ritual
Absolutely.
or gathering, avoid what there's if there's a void, there's something to fill it.
That is that. So all of that
I'm
is
curious
true.
what percentage could be,
So yeah, so in our neighborhood, there's just under 6,500 residents. 24% of those residents are under the age of 19.
whoa,
And
wait, 2,400
yeah, yeah, so
of the
about
6,500,
6,500. And so that's
and a third of them or more than a third
more
of
than,
them are under 19 years old.
yep, yep. So let's say there's 1,500 kids, under the,
Oh,
18 and under,
1,500. Got it.
give or take, right? Probably a little bit, anyway, give or take about 1,500 kids in the neighborhood. And what we do know, I mean, the power of out of school time program is not, is fundamentally a way to keep kids in a safe environment, because where they get themselves in the most trouble, where our kids get themselves, and all the things happening is out of school time, right? Like post 3 o'clock on the weekends in the summers, if they're hanging around, nothing else to do, they're going to find something to do, whether or not they become sexually active as teenagers, whether or not they become involved in crime-oriented behaviors, or drug use and more serious, health impactful ways. We do know that those out of school time hours are when those things happen. And as much as we can provide at the basic level, a safe place where kids go, where they are not attracted to those types of behaviors, and at the best case scenario, it's not just a safe place where they can go, but they're actually enriching their academic and, holistic lives through a variety of things. So here at the Lenfest Center, so not only do we have academic support and some real planning that goes post-secondary planning with our kids so that they are college and career ready when they graduate high school, but we provide enrichment opportunities like drumming and visual arts and pottery and chess and things like that. So, you know, as we like to say, there's a whole child there.
Mm.
And academics and career is one thing, but when you're 12 and 13, playing basketball is also fun, or dodgeball or flag football or, art class and drumming class. And those are all important. So we try to provide.
How do we get the all 1,500? To
Fabulous
part
question. So, because here we do not, obviously, we do not serve 1,500 kids in our one community center.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where the collective comes in, Jay. I mean, so the idea is that no one entity anywhere can do all the work. And even in a small neighborhood like Hunting Park in East Tioga here in North Philly, where there's 6,500 out of the 1.5-ish million people in Philadelphia, no one organization is going to solve the problem. And so that's where the collective comes in. And so what I'll promote here for the listeners is the fairly innovative idea of collective impact and what's required for collective impact work to be successful in neighborhoods like Hunting Park in East Tioga. And that is basically bringing together stakeholders in a neighborhood, both internal and external stakeholders, so they can be, content experts, citywide agencies, as well as local, what we call RCOs here, who deal with zoning issues, or small mom and pop daycare centers and out of school time programs like what we run, like, people who are involved and want to come together and solve a problem. Those kind of collective impact efforts are ultimately how we serve all 1,500 kids. And so if we think about what is required to hold a group of stakeholders together so that they can succeed together in solving big systemic issues that are impacting all 1,500 kids, we have been inspired to basically form what is referred to as a community backbone agency that supports the work of collective impact. And the primary role of a community backbone is to hold the collective together, to provide administrative support, to provide background research on best practices, to help hold together a shared agenda so that the collective itself knows what it's working on together, and to also help the collective agree upon shared measurements. Like, we're going to do this work. How do we know that we're succeeding or not succeeding? What are we learning from the work that we're doing? And it's not just succeed or unsucceed. It's what's going well, or, what are we learning from the data and the measurement that's going on there? So having that kind of support for the collective is immensely important. I'm sure you, as well as many of your listeners, have, and many times in our whole lives, we've tried to work in collaboration with others. And if we've been in companies or organizations that have done that, it's very hard because everybody's like, well, who's writing the agenda? Who's taking the notes? Who's sending out the calendar invites? Who's going to collect that? Who's going to do the homework, right? And everybody's like, well, I got my day job, right? I got to do this all my work for my other job. I'm also supposed to do this for this collective right now. So the backbone kind of helps organize it, makes it equitable, does a lot of that administrative work, helps guide resources to the collective action, so that if money is required because there's an effort to clean and green the streets of your neighborhood in Philadelphia, then the collective says, okay, the backbone helps kind of find the funding and oftentimes works as a fiscal sponsor for the collective action. So a lot of those kind of technical needs that get in the way of holding collective action efforts together, our community backbone is primed to do. And so that's actually very much happening, like in the process of happening here at North 10 with our neighbors. We've been very successful, and by we, I don't mean just North 10, but like this entire community has been very successful of working in collaboration with each other. But we're kind of at our limit and what we're capable of holding together without getting help. And so this backbone is the help that I think and we think is necessary in this community to keep the momentum going.
How many groups are there trying to serve this community?
Yeah. So there are I don't know if a lot is the right word. So North 10 is a part of a collaborative that we refer to as the Broad Germantown and Erie Collaborative that has 6 organizations that surround the main intersection in our neighborhood, which is the intersection of Broad, Erie, and Germantown avenues. And so that's where we get our name. And so those are 6 fundamental, strong organizations, very local organizations. But there's plenty of others, right? So there's other out of school time programs in the neighborhood. Inside the Lenfest Center is Squash Marts, which is a youth sports organization, but also high quality academics. There's another teen out of school time program with an organization called As I Plant This Seed that has a clubhouse a couple blocks away. Then it works with a lot of our teenagers in the neighborhood that does great work. And so there's a group of youth development specific focused organizations that are here. There are obviously there's the school and the school principal and the teachers that are there. The city and particularly agencies like the Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability, Otis here in Philadelphia has been a great partner in our work. So there's a whole variety of different agencies and organizations that are involved.
What role do you think law enforcement plays?
Yeah. A really important one.
Maybe
But if
good
I had the
for
answer to
part
exactly
two.
that's exactly so I'll stick with my first answer that came up. A really important role, but I do not know exactly what that role is, nor does our collective at this point. And so we have individual incredible relationships with the officers of the 25th police district here. The captain, the community engagement officer, even the beat officers, they as individuals, it's an extraordinarily important relationship that we have. They've been immensely helpful in many ways, including the local commercial corridor was severely impacted with some of the civil unrest that happened after George Floyd's killing a couple of years ago. And the law enforcement and local police precinct did really worked together with community organizations to hold the community together. That being said, it's a fraught relationship, particularly with our youth. There's lots of distrust. There's lots of work to happen. And so there is an important role to play. And what that role is, we're working on.
In closing, the strongest argument you can make to our listeners, so why getting involved benefits them.
Yeah. So I don't know what proportion of actually, it doesn't matter, right? So, we here in North 10 Philadelphia really think about neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods that we really think about are in cities, right? And particularly Hunting Park and East Tioga neighborhood in North Philadelphia. I think that our work resonates with anybody that either aspires or hopes to or wants to, or actually does know the value of the community in which they live and those really important, ties that bind that community together. And to recognize that we all benefit if our neighborhoods writ large are stronger, wherever those neighborhoods are. That we shouldn't be trying to separate ourselves from each other, but in fact, we need to bring ourselves closer together. And so a neighborhood that works by its own residents driving the work to improve what's happening in their environment fundamentally positively impacts the rest of Philadelphia, right? So what happens here in North Philadelphia, perceptions of crime, perceptions of failing schools, perceptions of the amazing park system that we have here in Philadelphia. But if the park here, which is called Hunting Park, which is a jewel in the crown of the Philadelphia park system, if that is mistreated and miscared for, it impacts the entire system. Resources are, disproportionately put in different places. And so there's a neighborhood here that forms together and wraps its arm around the Friends group of this amazing 87-acre park in our neighborhood. That benefits the entire city because we all get to benefit from this amazing, jewel in the crown of the park system of Philadelphia. So I absolutely believe that even that neighborhoods are, the residents are responsible for their neighborhood, right? And we need to get the citywide the resources that are part of it. But what happens here is absolutely a part of what happens and can benefit the rest of the city. And I think that's wherever you live. So to all the listeners there, how much you're involved in your own civic engagement, how much you just kind of fundamentally understand the importance of safety and education and housing in your own neighborhood is what's happening here. And I think that does speak to many people, if not all people. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm excited to have you back already. If you're listening to this podcast, I challenge you to take a look at North10, connect with Josh, give because it matters, makes a difference.
Thank you.
And please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time. Thanks, brother.